For this next section of the course, I'd like to focus on Spring Cloud. There is a lot to cover, so I'd first like to set the landscape of what Spring Cloud is, what it's for, and why it is instrumental to building microservices and cloud-native applications. First, I'll begin by providing a little background on the project origins. Then I'll explain a little bit about Netflix open source software, and finally I'll guide you through a brief set of topics that we'll want to cover before moving on. For this next section of the course, I'd like to focus on Spring Cloud. There is a lot to cover, so I'd first like to set the landscape. Presently, we are on 4.1. The goal of the Spring framework was to provide a simple, productive, well-architected substitute for some of the APIs that were coming from the J2EE world at that time. It has been a highly successful framework. Most organizations use it, at least to some extent. Now, since the 2.0 version of the Spring framework, we've seen a number of sub-projects spawn, things like Spring Security, Webflow, Spring Integration, and the others that you see listed here. What has really developed is a family of projects under the Spring umbrella. These projects are not part of the core Spring framework, but they follow the same principles and are easy to adopt. In fact, I would say that for the last 5 years, most of the innovation from Spring has not come out of the Spring framework itself, but from the sub-projects that it has spawned. Back in 2014, the term Spring I/O was coined to better explain this family of projects. Spring Framework is the centerpiece, but there has been an explosion of really fantastic sub-projects that are focused on the specific areas. The illustration you see here is only a partial list of projects, and it seems that every few months there is a new addition. Spring Cloud is a sub-project within the Spring I/O umbrella. And yet, it is actually several projects itself, so it is actually an umbrella within an umbrella. In the next few sections of this course, we will go through Spring Cloud Config, Netflix Eureka, Hystrix, Ribbon, Feign, and Spring Cloud Bus. There are other areas of Spring Cloud that this course will not address, such as Spring Cloud Connectors and Spring Cloud for Amazon Web Services. The Connectors project is a useful adapter when running on Cloud Foundry or Heroku, and the AWS project is useful if you need to deal with AWS at the API level, but we won't need to go into either of these areas. So what is the goal of Spring Cloud? The goal of Spring Cloud is to address the needs of cloud-based applications. Cloud-based applications are basically distributed applications running in an environment that is best characterized as volatile. And as such, there are some common patterns that are needed to address the reality of this platform. Throughout this course, we will go through the patterns listed here, and I will explain what the issues are, how the patterns address the issues, and how you can apply Spring Cloud to implement a solution. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned something about Netflix, so let's circle back and explain that part a bit more fully. So, where does Netflix fit into all of this? Netflix is the video streaming company that you are thinking about. Now, back around 2007, they quite famously reinvented their entire business. They had conquered the DVD mailing business, but they could see that it would eventually be supplanted by the video streaming over the internet. So they chose to innovate at a time when the viability of the video streaming was far from assured. Consequently, they became pioneers, in the truest sense of the word. They became pioneers in the cloud computing area, doing things that no one had done before. Now, rather than build their own massive infrastructure, they chose to utilize Amazon Web Services since AWS already had affordable, globally distributed compute and storage capability. However, AWS didn't really address the software component. No one did. So Netflix had to invent the technologies needed to deliver a world-class cloud-based business. Now, one of the things I find very interesting about this story is that the innovations in software did not come from the traditional IT companies that you think about, companies like Oracle or Microsoft or IBM or others, but from the people doing the actual work. It's the Netflixes, the Amazons, the LinkedIns, the Facebooks, the Googles. Netflix decided that many of their innovations were useful in general purpose systems that could be used for a wide variety of purposes. So they decided to open source these technologies to allow the benefit to pass to others. Now, the technologies that they developed around video streaming, they still keep those secret since they are a competitive advantage, but a lot of the general purpose ones have been open sourced. The Spring team has always had a forward-looking focus and had been very interested in addressing the needs of microservice-style applications that need to run in a cloud environment. The team was quick to discover that the Netflix OSS projects had addressed a number of key architectural items required in a cloud environment. And these were not theoretical needs, these were actual needs solved by developers on the front line of a business that needed to conquer cloud-based applications. And the quality and forethought was excellent, so there was really no need to reinvent this. But there was a need to improve the consumability of the Netflix projects. After all, Netflix developed these projects for their own needs, and they were not strongly motivated to make them easily consumable. And this is exactly where the Spring team came in, making it easy to consume the excellent work that had already been produced by the Netflix team. So as you will see in this course, Spring Cloud provides very easy access to these Netflix libraries. In many cases, all that's needed is a dependency and some additional annotations. So that is a high-level summary of what the Spring Cloud project is and where it fits in and where Netflix figures into all of this. Now before we jump into our first area, there are some conceptual items that I want to make sure we address. For the rest of this course, you'll be seeing code examples and you'll be actually building services that are based on Spring Cloud. The first thing to realize about the Spring Cloud libraries is that they are all intended to be used by Spring Boot applications. They are not intended to be utilized using just the Spring framework, although it's possible, but it really isn't the intent. All of the dependency management, and there is quite a bit, is all based on Spring Boot. And most importantly, the startup process of the application is usually altered slightly. And the application context is not created in the same straightforward way as a normal Spring framework-based application. I'll not go into the details here. It really isn't too important to grasp this, but I did want to qualify this from the very beginning. The other thing I wanted to warn you about before we get too far into this course is that it is important not to get lost on the terms client and server. These are relative terms based on the relationship of who is calling whom. And very often, one of our microservices is both a client and a server. This gets really tricky later on when we start talking about Eureka, so just remember that these are relative terms. Now, a common theme that you will see in the Spring Cloud projects is that there is a parent POM that is used for dependency management. This course will use Maven, but if you use Gradle, you'll have to know about this as well. The parent POM for Spring Cloud is used to control a number of dependency versions, and if you actually look at this POM, you will see that it in turn references the Spring Boot parent POM. So what you see here is an excerpt of a POM file that is representative of what we will see in most of the modules in this course. The parent is specified here. In fact, if you take a regular Spring Boot project, change the word boot to cloud, adjust the version, you will have adjusted the boot project into a cloud project. Next, in the dependencies section, you'll typically have to add the relevant dependency for what you are trying to bring in. The group ID is always org.springframework.cloud, and the artifact is always spring-cloud something. One thing to keep an eye on is the version of Spring Cloud. When I began creating this course, it was 1.0.0, and by the time I published it, it was 1.0.1, and within a few months, it was at 1.0.2. This area of Spring is being developed very actively, and it's actually made this course rather hard to keep up to date. At the time of this recording, Angel SR4 is the latest released version, and all of the labs use this version, but it may very well be that by the time you listen to this recording, the version will have moved upward, in which case you may see that the labs all use a later version, and even then it might not be the latest. Now, it's not always practical to change your parent POM settings just to use something in Spring Cloud. Many projects already specify a parent for their own needs, usually an organizational standard of some kind. So if this is the case, you can always add what Maven calls a dependency management section. It allows you to reference the parent POM without actually making it the parent. You can think of it like multiple inheritance. So to wrap up, Spring Cloud is a subproject within the Spring I/O umbrella, and it is itself an umbrella project. The point of Spring Cloud is to address common patterns in distributed computing, which are commonly encountered in cloud environments when using microservice architectures. Spring Cloud makes it easy to use the main Netflix libraries, and Spring Cloud is based on Spring Boot. So with this introduction out of the way, let's look in detail at each of the component projects.